was a late autumn evening when Lui Blackwood, a man of stoic demeanor and keen intellect, decided to venture into the remote mountains of Black Hollow. A seasoned hiker, Lui sought solace in the solitude of nature, a stark contrast to the clamor of his mundane life in the city. The mountain had always been a place of refuge for him, but on this particular journey, it would become something far more sinister. The wind howled as he ascended the rugged terrain, the cold air biting at his skin. The trees, once vibrant with life, stood as skeletal sentinels, their barren branches clawing at the sky. Lui had been warned of the mountain's treacherous paths and the ominous legends that surrounded it. Stories of lost souls, of eerie whispers carried by the wind, and of the abyss that swallowed those who dared to stray too far. Yet, Lui dismissed these tales as mere superstitions, the fanciful musings of the ignorant. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the world in a pallid twilight glow, Lui found himself deep within the heart of the mountain. The path he had so carefully plotted seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. He paused, his breath visible in the cold air, his senses alert to the unnatural silence that enveloped him. It was then that he first heard it, a faint, barely perceptible whisper carried by the wind. "Lui!" He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the darkening forest, but there was no one. The whisper had seemed so close, as though it had been spoken directly into his ear. He shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of the wind, a figment of his imagination. But the whisper came again, more insistent this time, as if urging him deeper into the woods. "Lui!" There was something in the voice, a tone that sent a shiver down his spine, yet compelled him to follow. Against his better judgment, he pressed on, his feet carrying him off the path and into the dense underbrush. The further he went, the stronger the whisper grew, echoing in his mind, weaving through the trees like a phantom. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees standing like twisted figures, their bark etched with strange, undecipherable symbols. The ground beneath him became uneven, littered with roots that seemed to grasp at his feet, as if trying to pull him into the earth. The air grew colder, the wind carrying with it a smell of decay, of something long dead and buried. It was then that Lui stumbled upon a clearing, a small circular patch of ground devoid of trees. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and weathered, covered in moss and lichen. Surrounding the altar were stones, arranged in a perfect circle, each one carved with the same strange symbols he had seen on the trees. The whispering ceased, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Drawn by an inexplicable force, Lui approached the altar. The air around it felt heavy, charged with an energy that made his skin crawl. As he reached out to touch the stone, the whisper returned, louder and more frantic than before. "Lui, the abyss. The abyss." His hand froze, hovering above the cold surface of the altar. The voice was no longer a whisper, but a chorus of voices, all speaking in unison, all repeating the same phrase. Panic seized him, his mind racing to understand what was happening. The abyss, what did it mean? Was it a warning or a command? Suddenly, the ground beneath him trembled, a low rumble emanating from deep within the earth. The stones around the altar began to glow, a sickly green light that pulsed in time with the chanting voices. Lui stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest, as the earth beneath the altar began to crack and split, revealing a dark, yawning chasm. The abyss. A wave of terror washed over him as he realized the true meaning of the whispers. The abyss was not just a place, but a presence, a malevolent force that sought to consume all who ventured too close. He turned to run, but the forest had changed. The trees now stood like prison bars, the path he had taken now lost in a maze of darkness. The voices grew louder, more urgent, as the chasm widened, the ground beneath him beginning to give way. He could feel the pull of the abyss, a force so strong it threatened to drag him into its depths. Desperation clawed at him as he fought to escape, but his legs felt like lead, his body betraying him as the ground crumbled beneath his feet. With a final desperate leap, Lui threw himself away from the altar, landing hard on the cold ground. He scrambled to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but the chasm continued to widen, the pull of the abyss growing stronger. He could hear the voices now, clearer than ever, a cacophony of madness that threatened to tear his mind apart. "Lui, come to us. Join us in the abyss." He ran, blind with terror, not knowing where he was going, only that he needed to get away. The forest seemed to twist and warp around him, the trees closing in, the ground shifting beneath his feet. The whispers followed him, growing louder, more insistent, as if the very air around him was alive with their presence. His breath came in short, panicked bursts as he stumbled through the darkness, his mind racing with thoughts of escape. But no matter how fast he ran, the voices were always there, just behind him, calling him, taunting him. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the voices stopped. The forest fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted from the air. Louis collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He was free. He had escaped the abyss. Or so he thought. As he lay there, the cold earth beneath him, he became aware of a presence, something lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. Slowly, he turned his head, his eyes widening in horror as he saw the figure standing at the edge of the clearing. It was a man, or what had once been a man. His skin was pale, almost translucent, his eyes sunken and lifeless. His clothes were tattered, hanging off his emaciated frame, and his hands were twisted into claws. But it was his face that struck the deepest chord of fear in Louis's heart, for the man's face was his own. The doppelganger stood motionless, its eyes fixed on Louis as if waiting for something. The air around it seemed to shimmer, the light bending and warping, as if the figure was not entirely real. Louis's mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. Was this a hallucination, a trick of the mind brought on by the terror he had just experienced? Or was it something far more sinister? The figure raised a hand pointing towards the chasm that had opened in the earth. The abyss still gaped wide, a dark, endless void that seemed to stretch into infinity. The whispers returned, but this time they were different. They were no longer calling to him, but to the figure, urging it to take his place. "Louis, the abyss awaits!" The doppelganger turned its lifeless eyes towards Louis, and in that moment he understood. The abyss was not just a place, but a cycle, a never-ending loop of despair and madness. The figure before him was not a mere reflection, but a shadow of what he would become, trapped forever in the grip of the abyss. Panic surged through him as he realized the truth. The figure was here to take his place, to drag him into the abyss and leave him there, lost and forgotten, while it walked free in the world above. He tried to move, to run, but his body refused to obey. The figure took a step towards him, and then another, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Louis's mind screamed for him to flee, to escape the fate that awaited him, but it was too late. The figure was upon him, its cold, claw-like hands reaching out to grasp him, to drag him into the abyss. He felt a sudden, overwhelming cold, as if his very soul was being sucked into the void. The whispers grew louder, a deafening roar that drowned out all thought, all reason. And then, there was silence. Louis awoke with a start, his heart pounding in his chest, his body drenched in cold sweat. He was back in his bed, in his small apartment in the city. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting a warm, golden light on the room. It had all been a dream, a nightmare born of his overactive imagination. He let out a sigh of relief, his body relaxing as the last vestiges of fear faded away. But as he sat up, something caught his eye. There, on the nightstand beside his bed, was a small, smooth stone, etched with strange symbols. His breath caught in his throat as he recognized it. It was one of the stones from the altar in the heart of the mountain. The whispers returned, faint but unmistakable, echoing in the back of his mind. "Louis, the abyss." He reached out to touch the stone, but his hand froze as he saw the reflection in the mirror across the room. It was his own face, but there was something wrong, something terribly wrong. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were sunken and lifeless, just like the doppelganger he had seen in the forest. Panic gripped him as he stared at the reflection, unable to believe what he was seeing. Was this real? Was he still dreaming? Or had the abyss followed him, dragging him back into its clutches even as he thought he had escaped? Louis's heart raced as he stumbled out of bed, his legs trembling beneath him. He had to get out, had to escape before it was too late. But as he reached for the door, the reflection in the mirror moved on its own, raising a hand to wave, a twisted, mocking smile spreading across its face. The whispers in his mind grew louder, echoing off the walls, filling the room with their maddening chorus. "Louis, come to us! Join us!" He fell to his knees, clutching his head, the overwhelming noise drowning out his thoughts. The room seemed to warp around him, the walls closing in, the light from the window dimming as the darkness seeped in from every corner. The stone on the nightstand began to glow with that sickly green light, pulsating in time with the whispers. Louis tried to scream, but no sound came out. His vision blurred, his body growing weak as the pull of the abyss grew stronger. He felt himself being dragged towards the mirror, towards the reflection that was no longer just a reflection, but a living, breathing entity. A dark shadow that sought to replace him. With a final, desperate effort, Lui lunged for the stone, hoping to destroy it, to break the connection to the abyss. But as his hand closed around it, he felt a surge of cold energy course through his body, freezing him in place. The reflection in the mirror stepped out, crossing the boundary between the worlds, becoming solid and real. It reached out, placing its cold hand over Lui's, the twisted smile never leaving its face. And then, with a sudden, violent force, it shoved Lui into the mirror. The world around him shattered like glass, the shards of reality slicing through him as he fell into the void. The whispers turned to screams, a cacophony of voices that tore at his mind, his soul. The last thing he saw before the darkness consumed him was his own reflection, standing in his place, smiling that same twisted smile as it waved goodbye. Lui fell, down into the abyss, into the endless void where time had no meaning, where the souls of the lost wandered for eternity. He was trapped, forever bound to the darkness, his mind fractured, his body a mere shadow of what it had once been. The whispers became his only companions, the voices of those who had fallen before him and those who would follow. And somewhere, in the world above, his doppelganger walked free, living the life that had once been his, while Lui faded into oblivion, forgotten by all. But the question remained, a question that would haunt anyone who heard his tale. Was Lui's fate truly sealed by the abyss, or was it his own mind, twisted by fear and isolation, that had created the nightmare he could never escape?